Hello and good morning. This is Ray Eason, aka Ray Ia, with the Ancient Tree of Life channel. It is currently 8:22 in the morning, February 26, 2020. Today is Wednesday. So today I want to talk a little bit about the 3 to 4 different cultures or spiritual origins or cultures that I work with. Real quickly, if you haven't already done so, go ahead and click below and click on my profile and subscribe to my YouTube channel. The YouTube channel has this video and all other videos in their entirety. So go ahead and subscribe below. So the ancient cultures that I usually work with are the ancient Kemetic Egyptian, and that's what I'm going to start calling. Some people know ancient Egypt for ancient Egypt, and then there are those who are more origin-oriented and use the more culturally correct African term, which is Kemetic. So I'm going to bridge the two and call it Kemetic Egypt, right? So I work with the Kemetic Egyptian energy. It's the first thing that really peaked or stuck out to me as I was growing up. The Sphinx, or Haramakhet as it's called, is one of the great symbols that woke me up when I was a young boy, right? I remember hearing people saying the Sphinx is a riddle, the riddle of the Sphinx, and because it was purported that nobody really understood it. And I think my brain went towards, well, if the people, the great adults, the beings that have been here prior to me have not figured this out, then what does it mean? And I took an interest in it, not directly but indirectly. Directly, I became interested in Greco-Roman mythology and culture, the Greeks, and more so the Greeks, less the Romans, and their Greek pantheon of gods, right? And I identify with Apollo because I'm a Leo, and so I think that was my doorway into a cultural presentation or welcome with the Kemetic Egyptian. Because to be honest, the Kemetic Egyptian is very dense and subtle, and most of their work is done in either hieroglyphs or pictures, drawings of things. And so it's more like reading art as opposed to reading words and directly synthesizing with it, right? So it requires a bit more of a spiritual cultural foundation and the understanding of the subtle world of things. So after years of growing up and being interested in the ancient Greeks, I realized they were a warmongering people at some point, but then at some point, aren't we all? But their warmongering actually brought down ancient Kemetic Egypt. And I think when I realized that, it made me have a disdain for... It added to the disdain that I was already feeling. The Greeks had a very... Their pantheon was solely based around their main god, who sort of hoarded up. I mean, I understand a god having multiple children, but the way they depicted Zeus or Juno in Roman, he hoarded up quite a bit and had a bunch of kids, and it was very questionable, right? Even his relationship, and maybe this is what subtly tugged at me, his relationship with his wife, it was very problematic. He was at war with Hera all the time over these things that happened with these kids of his, right? So I think subtly it made me realize the Greeks had an issue somewhere. Internally they had a warring about them, but maybe that's because that was the time frame that they were in, right? So that, in addition to, it seemed like their deities, their gods and goddesses, were more egotistical. Even the stories just seemed more ego-based, and I started to fall out of infatuation and love with the Greco-Roman mythology, and more so into the ancient Kemetic Egyptian lore and mythology and culture. But this was years later, decades, right? So the ancient Kemetic Egyptian culture, once again, I resonated with the god Ra or Re at first, because he's representative of the sun, and that would be representative of Leo, and once again, I'm Leo. So I had drawn a line from Apollo to Ra or Re in the Kemetic Egyptian pantheon, right? And so after learning about Ra and Re, that sort of, in the beginning, I was very proud. My name, even being Re, just made me feel there was a sort of a synthesis here, some sort of symbiosis, right? And so I started learning a bit more slowly over the years about the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Kemetic Egyptians, their gods, their people, how they lived, and I liked it. There was even a game that I played decades ago, about 20 years ago, called The Age of Mythology, and it was about, it had the Greeks and the ancient Egyptians and the Norse, and at some point it even had the Atlanteans in it, right? And I loved that game because I loved playing as the ancient Egyptians. I loved the music in the game when it would have like this sort of the sound was just sort of very, very cool and very like you were in the safari, just sort of just grooving it with nature and kind of just doing your work, doing your thing. It was very nice. And then there was also, they also had the Atlanteans, and they had the Greeks in this game as well. And so I remember reading and thinking, well, Greeks and Atlanteans, they were different people. And that sort of opened my eyes and mind to the Atlanteans. But I always thought that they were just this mythical, non-physical group of people, or maybe a sect of the Greeks that maybe lived on islands or whatnot, right? And so I didn't really fancy them or take too much interest in them until like the last probably like 2-3 years, right? And so I started learning about the ancient Egyptians, and then probably about 3 to 4 to 5 years ago, I started coming across different, actually probably about 5, yeah, 5-6 years ago, I started coming across older ancient Kemetic Egyptian lore, older than what the historians and the Egyptologists were actually talking about, right? And this information woke me up even more to what the ancient Kemetic Egyptians were doing and why they were so over the ages. They're so what's the term for it? They're very pivotal to our history and our in the Christian Bible's lore, right? The origin, right? So the Egyptians were very core to what was going on in the world, and then I later learned they were masters at thinking and creating and building and all these things, right? And so I started to learn we know less now about a lot of things, including the ancient world, than the ancient world did. They were very smart and intelligent and up to date on certain things, right? Granted, they didn't have telephones, but they had other ways, other means of communicating, right? And so after I started learning about the ancient Kemetic world, I started learning more about Aset and Asar and Heru, right? Isis, Osiris, and Horus. And that led into some older cultures, which led me back into ancient Babylon and ancient Sumeria. And in that world, that's where I found a lot of similarities between the ancient Kemetic and ancient Egyptian worlds. So I just want to touch on that. If you guys have any questions about any of the stuff, go ahead and give me a call. Click below, leave a message, comment. Let me know, and we'll talk about what you'd like to learn about the ancient world. Once again, this is Ray Ea with the Ancient Tree of Life channel. Thanks for watching. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.